Hey guys, tonight we begin with a sewer, specifically the Cloaca Maxima, a drainage channel built beneath the city of Rome around 500 BC, large enough at its main arch for a small boat to pass through, and so well engineered that sections of it are still actively draining surface water beneath the streets of modern Rome today. The civilization that built it rose, conquered most of the known world, peaked, fractured, and formally ceased to exist in the West. The sewer kept working. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. So let's set the scene. Rome, at its peak, somewhere around 100 AD, is a city of approximately 1 million people. 1 million. In a world where the average city tops out at 20 or 30,000, Rome is a logistical achievement that shouldn't work on paper. And yet it does, largely because of infrastructure. 11 major aqueducts deliver somewhere between 200 and 300 gallons of fresh water per person per Dalton Y, which, for reference, is more per capita than most American cities deliver today. That water feeds 900 public baths, open to everyone, admission roughly the price of a handful of nuts. It feeds continuous flow public latrines, where waste moves directly into the sewer system. It feeds the street fountains that overflow constantly, by design, because the overflow washes the streets. There are paved roads with raised sidewalks and drainage channels cut into the curbstones. There is the Cloaca Maxima, handling it all underneath. Not because the Romans were particularly virtuous or particularly clean-minded, they were not. And they complained about their city smells the way people in cities have always complained. But because a city of 1 million people that doesn't manage its own waste does not stay a city of 1 million people for very long. Now, the Western Roman Empire formally ends in 476 AD, though it had been collapsing in a very committed way for several centuries before anyone made it official. Cities empty out. Rome itself drops from 1 million people to somewhere around 20,000. London, which the Romans had built as Londinium, with a functioning provincial water supply and street drainage, reverts to something considerably more modest. The aqueducts crack. Nobody has the budget to fix them, because there is no budget, because there is no tax revenue from a city that no longer has enough people to generate any. And the infrastructure, the sewers, the baths, the drainage channels, does what all infrastructure does when maintenance stops. It stops working, slowly and then completely. Here is the part that takes a moment to land properly, and that is worth establishing before we go any further tonight. Medieval Europeans did not forget how to build sewers. This is not a story about ignorance. Vitruvius wrote a complete manual on Roman engineering, aqueducts, drainage systems, public water infrastructure, all of it around 15 BC, and copies of that manual were sitting in monastery libraries throughout the medieval period. Medieval builders were physically quarrying Roman ruins for reusable stone, which means they were touching the infrastructure, walking past the arches of the drainage systems, handling sections of Roman pipe. The knowledge was present. The ruins were present. What was absent was the economic basis to act on any of it. Roman infrastructure operated at the scale of a 1 million-person city because it had to, and because it could. You cannot fund an aqueduct for 20,000 people and have the numbers work. The capital cost, the maintenance workforce, the annual repair budget. All of it requires a tax base that only exists if you have enough people to tax. When the population of Rome collapsed by 95%, the fiscal basis for maintaining any of this went with it, not by choice, not by ignorance. The math stopped working when the people left, and the infrastructure followed the math. And what grew up in the space the infrastructure left behind was medieval Europe's cities, which were not barbaric and were not stupid, and were full of people doing the reasonable best they could, with the reasonable best they could with the resources that a population of 15,000 generates, which is not the same as the resources a population of 1 million generates, and never will be. And it is worth pausing to note, because we will come back to this tonight, that while northwestern Europe was working through this gap, other parts of the world were not. Parts of the world were not. The capital of the Umayyad Caliphate, in what is now Spain, had approximately 500,000 residents in the year 900 AD paved streets. Street lighting, running water from maintained aqueducts, hundreds of public baths. At the exact same historical moment, London had 10,000 people, and none of those things. The gap between Ceuta and London in 900 AD was not a gap in intelligence, or civilization, or human capability. It was a gap in population density, which is a gap in tax revenue, which is a gap in the fiscal basis for maintaining the infrastructure that makes a city function. The math, eventually, works itself out. London reaches 500,000 people in the 18th century, and when it does, it starts to build accordingly. In 1250, the math has not worked itself out. You are about to find out, in personal and sensory and considerably slow detail, what the gap looks like from the inside. It looks like a street. It looks like a very specific kind of street, on a very specific kind of morning, in a city that once had a sewer carved into the earth beneath it and has not seen that sewer perform its intended function in 800 years. Congratulations, you've just woken up in London. The year is 1250. The good news: you have a roof, timber, framed, thatched, with gaps, through which you can see the sky on clear nights, which is either charming or a structural deficiency, depending on how you approach it. And this morning, the gap at the base of the door is admitting a thin line of cold air that has been working on the exposed parts of you for some time. The bad news: the city you've woken up in had functioning Roman drainage infrastructure 800 years ago, and nobody has maintained it since. And what replaced it is your neighbour's window, which opens outward onto the street, and the informal understanding that you look before you walk directly beneath it. The morning is already here. It does not wait for you to be ready for it. You open your eyes and the first thing that arrives is the smell, not gradually. It arrives the way smell arrives when you have been sleeping in it all night, and your nose has made its peace with it, and then you move, and the equilibrium briefly breaks. The room you sleep in is the room your family lives in, which is also the room separated from the space where your pig spends its nights by a low wooden partition that addresses the visual problem without meaningfully addressing the olfactory one. The straw on the floor is not fresh. Fresh straw is a seasonal event, not a daily renewal, and the straw you are currently lying on has been compressed and absorbed into the packed earth beneath it in the way of material that has reached an accommodation with its situation. Your blanket smells like the room. Your hair smells like the room. You have always smelled like the room, and the room has always smelled like this, and you understand this, the way you understand weather, as a condition of existence rather than a problem requiring a solution. You sit up. The movement ends the conservation of heat that your body has spent all night maintaining under the blanket, and the cold that has been waiting just outside your immediate vicinity registers across your shoulders and the back of your neck in one clean declarative moment. The floor is cold through the soles of your feet when you stand. The packed earth doesn't warm. It operates at a temperature several degrees below comfortable, and your feet register this as information and move past it, because moving past it is what there is to do. Across the partition, the pig has noticed you are awake. The pig communicates this in the way pigs communicate most things, which is loudly, and with conviction, and with a sustained quality that suggests it considers the communication important. Your youngest child turns in the corner, without waking. Outside, audible through the gap at the base of the door, and the gap in the thatch above, something is moving in the street. A cart, from the sound, wheels finding the ruts in the mud, the load shifting as it does. Here is what the city of Rome smelled like at its peak, according to sources who were there. Not great, honestly. The Romans complained about their city's smells, with the same resigned specificity that people in cities have always complained. But the Aqua Claudia and the Anio Novus, and the 9 other major aqueducts together, delivered somewhere between 200 and 300 gallons of fresh water per person, per Dalton Y. More per capita than the average American city delivers today. That water fed 900 public baths, open to all, admission 1 quadrans, which was the smallest coin in circulation. It fed public latrines with continuous water flow, which moved waste directly into the cloaca maxima. It fed the street fountains that overflowed by design, because the overflow washed the road surface, because the road surface had drainage channels to receive it, because the drainage channels connected to the sewer below. The city was a system, not a perfect system. 1 million people is a lot of people under any circumstances, but a system where inputs and outputs were managed at a scale that made the city survivable, because the alternative was not survivable. You go to the door. It opens outward, standard arrangement, and the air from the street moves in before you've fully opened it. The cold of an October morning, carrying beneath it the smell of the street, which is different from the smell of the room. The room has been closed all night. The street has had all night and is beginning its day. You stand in the doorway for a moment and take the morning in, which is to say you take in the light, which is the grey knot. Quite light that comes before daylight proper, sitting flat between the buildings on either side of the narrow lane. Around you the street is acquiring its morning population. The woman from 2 doors down with her water bucket. The same cart you heard from inside, now visible at the end of the lane. A dog investigating something near the base of the wall across from you, with the focused attention of an animal that has found something worth investigating. The mud in the street is the mud of a street that receives everything a street receives and drains into itself. The mud is 800 years of a street draining into itself. The smell of the street in the morning is different from the smell at midday, which is different from the smell at evening. And you know this the way you know weather, not through deliberate study, but through the accumulated experience of years of being in it. The morning smell is cold, which is to say the cold air holds it lower, compresses it, keeps it close to the surface, rather than letting it rise and disperse the way it will when the afternoon comes, and the foot traffic increases the temperature by a degree or two. The cold makes it dense. It enters through your nose and sits there in the way of cold air that has travelled from the street a short distance into your face and carried everything the street contains with it, which is everything the street has received since the last rain, which was 4 days ago. You register it. You step forward. Roman urban streets in planned cities were built with something that seems obvious in retrospect, and apparently required the collapse of an empire for people to stop doing. The sidewalks were raised above the road surface, with curbstones that had channels cut into them, directing runoff towards sewer grates set into the road. At intersections, large stepping stones crossed the width of the street, so pedestrians could pass without walking through the drain channel running along the centre. The street cleaned itself because the design made cleaning an outcome of its own use. The rain fell, the channels directed it, the sewers received it, the Tiber got it eventually. London, which the Romans built as Londinium in the 1st century AD, had some of this. Archaeologists have found Roman drainage infrastructure below the medieval city. Stone, lined channels, culverts, the remnants of a supply system drawing from the Walbrook stream. By 1250, what London has is this street, which is the drain and the road and the refuse deposit simultaneously, and which processes everything deposited on it at the rate that a mud lane processes things, which is slowly, imperfectly, and with results that are visible and olfactory and continuous. There is a pig in the alley to your left. You know this pig by presence the way you know most fixed features of your immediate neighbourhood. Not by name, but as a daily fact, something you root around without deliberate thought. The pig is eating. Specifically, it is working through the organic material accumulated along the alley's edge since the last time the city rakers came through with their cart, which was not recently, and which you know because you know what the alley looks like after the rakers have been, and this is not it. The pig does this with commitment and without apparent judgment about its circumstances. You step around it. The pig does not look up. The pig is working, and this is technically true in an official sense. The City of London licenses pigs to roam the streets for this precise purpose, as an informal processing system for organic street waste. The pig is not trespassing. The pig is performing a municipal service. The pig has better standing in the city's waste management framework than most of the city's other residents. Here is what historians spent a long time establishing, and what is worth holding on to as you continue your morning. Medieval Europeans were not ignorant about Roman engineering. Vitruvius's architectural manual, written around 15 BC and containing complete instructions for building aqueducts, drainage systems, and public water infrastructure, was copied and preserved in monastery libraries for the entire medieval period. Medieval builders were quarrying Roman ruins for reusable stone, walking past the arches of drainage systems, cutting Roman curbstones out of the ground, handling sections of Roman water pipe. The knowledge was there. The physical evidence was there. What was not? There was a city of 1 million people, generating the tax revenue and maintenance workforce that Rome's infrastructure required to function. London in 1250 has somewhere between 10 and 15,000 residents. You cannot fund an aqueduct on the tax base of 15,000 people, any more than you can fund a subway network for a market town. The math doesn't work. It didn't fail through stupidity, or choice, or the collapse of some civilizational virtue. It failed because the population collapsed, the revenue collapsed with it, and the infrastructure followed the revenue. And what you are walking through this morning is the physical result of that sequence, playing out over 8 centuries without interruption. You step into the street. The mud accepts your weight with the slight give of ground that has been rained on and walked on and received what streets receive. And when your foot comes up, there is the small specific sound of a soul pulling from earth that has taken a temporary hold. The bucket is in your hand. The well is 2 streets over. You know the route, the way you know all routes in your immediate world, not by conscious navigation but by years of accumulated muscle memory. The place near the tanners where you breathe through your mouth, the place where the mud deepens. The junction of 2 alleys that forms a low point and handles drainage in its own creative way. The cold is in your clothes now, not just at their surface. The grey morning light sits in the space between the buildings at that particular flat angle of October that illuminates everything evenly and conceals nothing. The street smells like the street. You adjust your grip on the bucket, you begin walking. The well is a stone, lined shaft with a wooden cover frame, operated by a bucket and a rope worn smooth where it crosses the lip of the frame. You lower your bucket. The rope runs through your hands, cold, rough, the texture of a rope that has been used daily, in all weather, for longer than you have been using it. The bucket descends into the dark, which is the dark of groundwater, which is the dark of the earth, at the depth where the water table sits, which is the earth at the depth where everything deposited at the surface eventually arrives. You hear the bucket touch the water, you hear it fill, you draw it back up hand over hand. The water is cold and carries the mineral quality of this ground, which is the ground of a city of 15,000 people, and the well draws from it at the depth the well was sunk to, which is the depth someone decided was adequate a generation ago. You pour it into your carrying bucket. Beneath the street you are standing on, 40 feet down, the stone channel the Romans cut to supply Londinium with water from the Walbrook is still there in the ground. It has not moved. It has not carried water since before your great-grandmother was born. It does not know what year it is. Neither, for most practical purposes, does anyone here. You carry the water back. The full bucket is heavy in the way that becomes familiar rather than diminishing. Familiar weight, familiar distance, familiar shoulder registering both in the sequence. It has registered them every morning for years. The street is busier now. The morning properly underway. Vendors arranging their goods. The sound of hammering from somewhere down toward the river. A child at a full run threading between 2 carts. You step around the pig again, which has moved and found something new and is applying the same focused investment it brings to everything. You reach your door. You step inside. The room is marginally warmer than the street, which registers as warmth because that is what it is. You set the bucket down. The water is what the water is. Your hands are cold and smell of the rope. Outside, the street is doing what the street does, which is receiving the morning the way it receives every morning, without ceremony, without drainage, and without the infrastructure that the people who built this city once knew how to provide and could no longer afford to maintain. The day has begun. It will go on from here. The fire is embers when you get back to it. You left it banked under ash before you went out, and it is held, or held mostly, the orange glow still present at the core when you rake back the ash with the iron. You build it up from the small store of wood beside the door, 2 pieces first, place to catch, then a third when the flame takes. The water you carried goes into the iron pot on the hook above the hearth, and the pot is iron black and heavy, and makes the same dull sound it always makes when the water settles into it. Confirmation rather than noise. Confirmation that the fire is going, and the water is in, and the morning is advancing. Your youngest is awake now, watching from the corner with the quiet of a child who has learned that the fire means something warm is coming. The room is the same room it was 20 minutes ago, with the same smell, and the same light, and the same arrangement of everything in it. The fire makes one corner of it warmer than the others. You stand in that corner. The oats go in when the water is warm enough that steam has begun lifting off the surface in thin threads. You add them from the bag by the door, the bag that is moving toward the point in the month where the running toward becomes conscious arithmetic, but not there yet. And you stir with the wooden spoon that is the colour of everything else in this room, which is the colour of things that have been used for a long time in a small space and absorbed what they've been near. The porridge begins to smell like porridge, which is one of the few smells in your morning that registers as welcome rather than ambient. The texture builds as you stir, the oats thickening in the water. Your youngest has moved closer without appearing to make a decision about it, drawn by the smell, or the warmth, or both, and is standing at your elbow in the way of someone waiting without asking. The morning is the morning, the porridge is what it is. You stir it. The cloaca maxima, which translates without elegance as the Great Sewer, was begun around 600 BC under the Tarquin kings to drain the marshy valley between Rome's hills. where the forum would eventually stand. It started as an open drainage channel. Over the following centuries it was vaulted over, extended, integrated with the aqueduct system that kept it continuously flushed, and eventually responsible for draining the baths, the latrines, the street runoff, and the waste of 1 million people into the Tiber. The main arch at its Tiber discharge point is large enough that a fully laden cart could drive through it without difficulty. In the early 20th century, engineers excavating beneath central Rome found sections of it still intact and still actively carrying groundwater. They rerouted their excavation around it. It was doing its job. Nobody had maintained it since the late Empire. Nobody had asked it to do its job in 1500 years. It had simply kept going, because the engineering was that good. And the engineering was that good, because in a city of 1 million people, the sewer not working was not a condition anyone could afford to tolerate. The cesspit is at the back of the building, accessed through the narrow passage between your wall and the next one, and it has been full since sometime in late August when the gong farmer last came around. This is not an emergency. The cesspit being full is a condition that cycles between acceptable and urgent and back to acceptable on a schedule roughly connected to when the gong farmer can be paid, which is connected to other things. And right now it sits in the part of the cycle that is full but stable, covered and present in the way that a gap at the back of the building communicates when the wind comes from that direction. You are aware of this. Your nose knows the angle. The well is 2 streets over in the other direction, which is the right direction, the direction with less information about the cesspit in it. But both exist in the same neighbourhood, in the same soil, at depths that have their own relationship with each other that you have never been invited to calculate. The water in your pot is warm now. You add more oats. The Aqua Claudia was completed in 52 AD under Emperor Claudius, running 45 miles from springs at Subiaco to deliver clean water at an elevation high enough to supply the city's baths and fountains across the whole urban area. And it was, by any standard, extraordinary. But the more important thing about it is how much it cost to keep running. The aqueduct required continuous inspection, teams of workers walking the entire length at regular intervals, checking for cracks in the channel lining, clearing vegetation from the joints of the arcade arches above ground, repointing the mortar where it had softened, repairing the settling that the subsoil produced over years. A crack unaddressed promptly undermined the foundation below it, brought down a section of arcade, cut the supply to everything downstream. Keeping it running was not an event but a permanent workforce, funded continuously, deployed along the full route, paid from state revenue. When the state's revenue collapsed with the population, the workforce ceased, the inspection stopped. The cracks went unrepaired. The aqueduct that had delivered clean spring water for 4 centuries stopped delivering clean spring water. The springs at Subiaco are still there. The water still flows from them. It goes nowhere useful now. The water in the pot is the colour of the pot. Not dark, not visibly wrong in any way your eyes can usefully act on. Just the colour of water from the well 2 streets over, which is the colour of groundwater at the depth of that well. In this neighbourhood, drawing from this earth, you have been drinking water from this well, or wells like it, your entire life. You have never tasted water from a mountain spring delivered through 45 miles of sealed stone channel. You have no frame of reference for what that would taste like, or what the difference would feel like in your body over years, or what it would mean to have access to it. You drink the water because the water is here, and because you are thirsty, and because there is nothing else. Your body has adapted to the water, the way bodies adapt to the conditions they inhabit. Your body does not know it has adapted. Neither do you. You stir the pot. The porridge is nearly ready. Here is the sequence by which Rome's sanitation infrastructure collapsed, which took roughly 200 years and happened in exactly the order you'd expect. First, the aqueducts developed cracks that went unrepaired when the maintenance budget was cut. Then the public baths the aqueducts supplied began to close, because without a continuous fresh water supply, a bathhouse is just a series of expensive heated rooms. Then the street fountains that overflowed continuously, whose overflow washed the streets, went dry. Then the streets that had been designed to drain into the sewer system stopped draining into it, because the channels were blocked by the debris the overflow had previously kept moving. And then the cities were left with the well and the cesspit and the street as drain, none of which were designed to coexist at urban density, all of which were coexisting anyway, because there was no alternative. The alternative had been built and funded and maintained, and had stopped being funded, and had failed in the sequence described above, one step at a time, over 2 centuries, with no single dramatic moment and no single decision that could be pointed to and blamed. The porridge is ready. You lift the pot from the hook with the cloth you use for the handle, and you eat standing at the hearth because the hearth is warmest, and because the bowl warms your hands, which is a useful secondary function of breakfast. Your youngest eats beside you, making the sounds children make when eating something warm and filling. The porridge tastes like porridge, oats cooked in water from your well, which has a mineral quality you would describe, if asked, as just the taste of water, because you have no other water to compare it to. Roman water from the Aqua Virgo, which still supplies the Trevi fountain today, and was considered Rome's finest aqueduct water, was described by ancient writers as light and sweet, cold from the springs, carrying none of the mineral weight of well water. Vitruvius included instructions for testing source water quality. Before committing to an aqueduct route, observe the health of those who drink it. Check whether boiling produces sediment. Check whether cooking leaves residue. Your well water would not pass Vitruvius's tests. Your body has calibrated to your well water over a lifetime. These are not the same thing. You set the bowl down. The light through the door gap is properly daylight now. The flat grey of early morning replaced by something with direction to it, coming from the east, not yet reaching your door, but present in the lane. You put on your outer layer, the heavier wool, the one that goes over everything else, that has the weight and density of a garment, worn in weather, and dried by fire enough times that the fibres have compressed into something with a shape that is the shape of you in it. It smells like the room, which smells like the fire, which smells like the wool, which smells like you. These are not separate smells, so much as aspects of a single smell with multiple sources. You fasten it. Your youngest is finished eating. The fire will hold until you come back. The pot will need rinsing later, which means another trip to the well, which is the arithmetic of every day in this city. Water in, water out. The same well, the same rope, the same bucket, the same ground beneath all of it. You step back out into the street. The morning has shifted while you were inside. More people now. The full mid-morning weight of the neighbourhood, conducting its business in the lane. The smell of the street has changed too. The cold compression of early morning, replaced by something slightly warmer and slightly more present, as the foot traffic does what foot traffic does to a mud lane in October. The pig is back in the alley, which you expected. The vendor at the corner has his goods laid out, and he's talking to someone in the specific, unhurried way of a man who has made his first sale already, and can afford to be sociable. The street is the street. It was here before you, it will be here after you. It has been here in some form since before the Romans built their version of it 2 feet below where you are standing now, and it will be here long after whatever comes next. You walk into it. The day continues. The sewer beneath your feet continues also, in its own way, doing what it was built to do with the water that still, somehow, finds its way down to it. The wool against your skin as you walk is the wool you know, not the casual awareness of it when standing still, but the more specific awareness that comes with movement, with the friction of fabric at the places where your body bends and turns. Your shoulders, where the outer layer shifts with each step, the inside of your elbows. The collar, which is the collar it has always been, shaped into the shape of your neck and your shoulders after years of being worn by that specific neck and those specific shoulders. And it sits there the way things sit that have given up any ambitions about fitting a different body. The wool is warm. This is its primary quality this morning, and it is doing that job without qualification. It is also stiff in the way wool that has dried by a fire many times is stiff. It is also the colour of wool that has been through weather, and used until colour is no longer something it has strong opinions about. It is warm. This is the thing. The wool in your tunic was processed through fulling, which is the step in cloth production that sets the fibres, removes the natural lanolin oils, thickens the weave, and turns raw woven cloth into the dense weather resistant material that medieval English winters require. The most effective agent for this process, used across the entire medieval period, and used by Roman fullones long before that, was stale human urine, fermented, collected in quantity, and allowed to sit long enough to develop the ammonia content that gives it its cleaning and felting properties. The guild of fullones in ancient Rome was prominent enough that the Emperor Vespasian taxed their urine collection operations, producing the phrase pecunia non olet. Money doesn't smell when his son objected to the revenue source. Medieval fullers inherited the practice directly. It worked. It was free, or nearly free, requiring collection rather than purchase. And in a trade operating without easy access to the Roman alternative, the urine option was not a degraded fallback. It was the standard method. It is still the standard method. It was the standard method. It was the standard method this morning when you put your tunic on. The urine collector came through your street last Tuesday. You know this because Tuesday evening the air in the lane near the fuller's workshop, 2 streets over, had a particular quality that announced itself before you rounded the corner, and that you identified immediately and correctly as collection day. The fuller puts out wooden vessels in locations the neighbourhood knows about and uses, and the contents are transferred to the vats at the workshop on a schedule, and the cloth goes in, and the work begins. You have walked past that workshop in summer, when the work is ongoing, and the doors are open, because the summer heat inside the workshop without the doors open is a condition that the people working inside it find more objectionable than the street knowing what is happening in there. You know which direction the fulling district is from your building, the way you know which direction the cesspit is. Not because you checked, but because the wind at certain angles tells you. And you have been receiving this information every day of your life, and you have learned to read it the way you read everything about the neighbourhood, without effort, as part of the background of things that are simply true. The fulling process worked as follows. The woven cloth was submerged in the vat of collected urine, and the fullers stood in the vat and trod it underfoot. Walking in place for hours, the combination of ammonia and sustained physical pressure working the fibres together and drawing out the lanolin. This is where the regional term walking cloth came from. It was heavy labour, a full working day, in an enclosed space, in a vat of fermented urine, in a room that medieval London's ordinances classified as producing a smell, constituting a public nuisance requiring administrative management. The city repeatedly attempted to zone fulling operations away from market areas, churches, and high-status streets, downwind, downstream, at a remove from the places where people with standing to complain spent their time. Some decades the attempt made progress, other decades it didn't. The workshop 2 lanes over has been where it is for longer than the ordinance that prefers it elsewhere has existed, and the ordinance has not won that argument yet, and the workshop does not appear to be waiting for the outcome. Your shirt is warm, this is the thing about it, and it does that thing. Under your hands, when you pull the outer layer aside, the fabric has the texture of cloth that has been worked and worn and washed long enough that the individual fibres are no longer distinguishable. It is unified cloth, a surface rather than a weave, the compressed result of years of use. It is the colour of undyed wool that has been through water and fire and weather, which is the colour of everything in your wardrobe. You do not think about how it was made. You have never had a reason to think about how it was made. In the same way you have never had reason to think about the depth of your well or the proximity of your cesspit to the soil the well draws from. You wear the shirt because it is warm. It is warm because someone fulled it. It was fulled in the standard way, with the standard materials, because the standard materials were what was available and what the cost allowed. You are warm. The shirt has done what the shirt was made to do. Rome had fuller's earth, a naturally occurring clay mineral, smectite in most English deposits, which has ammonia, like degreasing properties without the sourcing process. Roman fullones used both urine and fuller's earth, and fuller's earth was available at the Roman market as a commercial product. Fuller's earth still exists in medieval England. There are deposits in Surrey, and English fuller's earth would later be exported across Europe in significant quantities in the later medieval and early modern periods. The issue is not availability, the issue is cost. A guild fuller in 1250 is running a small workshop with materials costs, premises costs, labour costs, and a margin constrained by what cloth buyers will pay for finished fabric. Fuller's earth costs money to quarry, transport, and purchase. Urine from the neighbourhood costs the price of the collection vessels and a Tuesday, for a workshop operating at the margins that most medieval craft workshops operate at. The calculation is not a difficult one. Your tunic was made by someone who ran those numbers and arrived at the same conclusion every fuller arrives at. The numbers are clear. It is also worth noting that the Roman fullones were not only cloth producers, they were launderers. Working businesses at street level, they cleaned finished garments brought to them by customers using the same ammonia process. The vat, the treading, the rinse, the stretch, drying on frames in the sun. In Pompeii, archaeologists found fullones workshops preserved in the eruption with frescoes on the walls showing the work process in detail. The vats, the men treading, the frames. These were integrated into daily urban life at a scale that required, crucially, access to running water for the rinsing stage. The Roman fuller rinsed cloth with fresh water from the aqueduct supply. The medieval fuller rinses in water carried from a well or drawn from a river that is also receiving what rivers in medieval cities receive from everything upstream of where the bucket goes in. The cloth goes in dirty. The process happens. The cloth comes out less dirty than it went in. The word clean is doing different work in those two contexts, and neither context is the one the cloth you are wearing was processed in, because that was weeks ago and you haven't been to the fullers since. You put your hood up. The hood is the same wool as the outer layer, the same weight, the same weave, the same history of having been through the same vat in the same district by the same method. It comes over your ears and down to the back of your neck, and you pull the front edge forward to cover your forehead, which is the adjustment you make every morning without thinking about it, because your hands know where the edge wants to sit. Under the hood, your head warms quickly, the small enclosed space doing what enclosed spaces do with the heat your body is already producing. Your ears were reporting the cold in the detailed way. Ears report cold when they've been exposed. They stop reporting it. The wool at the back of your neck is slightly rough. Not the roughness of new cloth, but the roughness of cloth that has been washed and dried many times and shaped to one particular neck over many winters. Familiar roughness. The roughness of something that knows you. You have worn this hood every cold morning you can remember. It smells like everything else. Everything smells like everything else. You walk. The full weight of what you are wearing. The shirt, the hose, the outer layer, the hood, the shoes that are your shoes, is the weight you walk in every day, and you no longer register it as weight, but as presence, the settled density of being clothed in wool in October in a city where the alternative is cold. Your arms move in the sleeves in the way they move in sleeves that have been worn for years, without friction beyond the familiar friction of cloth against skin that knows each other. You are warm in the places the wool covers. Your face is cold. Your hands out of the sleeves are cold in the specific way. Hands are cold when the rest of your body is warm. Targeted cold. Cold that knows exactly where the wool stopped and made its decision. The lane is ahead of you. The morning is ahead of you. Everything you are wearing was made by someone whose workshop 2 streets over is currently producing information that the wind carries east. The wind today comes from the east, which means the air in this part of the lane is the air that arrives without that particular contribution. You notice this not as relief. Relief would require anticipating discomfort, but as ambient data, the way you take in wind direction every morning, as part of understanding what the day will smell like, and from which direction. You know the zones of this city the way everyone knows them. The tanneries south of the river, the fishmongers near the bridge, the slaughterhouses that the city periodically attempts to relocate and fails to relocate, for the same institutional reasons. The fulling workshops are where they are. These zones are not marked on any document accessible to you. They are marked in the accumulated knowledge of everyone who lives here, maintained in the daily experience of living in a specific place, with specific neighbours, doing specific things. You carry this knowledge the way you carry everything about your neighbourhood, not as information you sought, but as information the neighbourhood has deposited in you over years, whether you wanted it or not. You walk through it. It is where you live. The street broadens slightly where 2 lanes meet, and in the broadened section the mud is deeper, the ruts more pronounced, the surface more committed to its purpose of being a surface that receives everything and releases nothing. Your shoes find the ruts and track them for a step or two before you redirect. Not through conscious navigation, but through the body's acquired knowledge of this particular junction. The lean left that keeps you on the firmer ground near the wall, rather than the soft centre where the runoff from both lanes converges, and has been converging for long enough that the ground there has a different quality, a yielding quality, the quality of ground that has accepted a great deal and developed its own character in response. The morning air is cold enough that your breath shows briefly ahead of you and then is gone. Above you, the upper stories of the buildings on either side lean toward each other across the lane, not touching, but narrowing the strip of sky between them to something closer to a suggestion than a view. You walk under this suggestion of sky. The mud under your feet is the mud of the lane in October, after 4 days without rain, which means it is neither fresh mud nor dried mud, but the particular in-between mud that has been walked on enough to develop a crust, and not walked on enough for that crust to hold reliably. Your foot goes through it at intervals. You have learned to expect this. Something moves in the upper story of the building to your right. A shutter, the specific sound of a wooden shutter being unlatched from inside. You know this sound the way you know most sounds in this lane, as information requiring a rapid, practiced assessment. You move toward the wall. This is not a dramatic movement. It is the casual, habitual adjustment of a person who has lived in this city long enough to know what a shutter opening above street level typically precedes, and who has learned to position themselves accordingly without interrupting whatever they were thinking about or doing. The wall is closer to you now. The lane continues ahead. You wait a half second without appearing to wait. Nothing comes. The shutter was open for air, or light, or to hang something over the sill. One of the other things an upper story shutter can proceed. And you continue. You have made this assessment many times. You will make it again before you reach where you are going. Your body has built the assessment into the automatic machinery of walking through this city, alongside watching for the ruts and reading the mud and noting the wind direction. Roman streets in planned cities were engineered with a logic that seems from a distance of 1,000 years startlingly obvious. The pedestrian sidewalks were raised above the road surface, higher than the centre of the street, with a clear physical separation enforced by the curbstones. Those curbstones had channels cut into their inner faces, angled to direct runoff from the sidewalk, and the road surface towards sewer grates set into the paving. At intersections, large stepping stones were placed at intervals across the road width, raised above the centre channel, so pedestrians could cross without walking through whatever was running along the drain. The system worked because it was designed to work, because someone had decided, when planning the street, that water needed to move in a specific direction and had built the infrastructure to enforce that decision. London's Roman predecessor, Londinium, had some of this. Archaeological excavations have found Roman paving, Roman drainage channels, Roman street infrastructure beneath the medieval city. By 1250, what has replaced this system is the street itself. The street is the channel. The street is where everything goes because that is the only direction available. You are walking in the drain. This is not a figure of speech. The centre of the lane, the lower ground that the ruts and the shape of the buildings direct all runoff toward, is the channel. Everything that falls on this street, rain, the contents of buckets, the output of the pig's morning circuit, whatever arrives from the upper stories of the buildings on either side, moves toward the centre by gravity and accumulates there at the pace that gravity and the street's slight slope allow. In Roman streets, the centre channel was designed, maintained and connected to the sewer system below. In your street, the centre channel is simply where things go because they have nowhere else to go, and where they accumulate until the rakers come, which is not always soon, and until the next rain moves things along, which cannot always be relied upon. You are not walking in the centre. You are walking near the wall. You have learned to walk near the wall. In Edinburgh, and in London, and in Paris, and in every city in medieval Europe that had buildings taller than one story, the standard practice for disposing of chamber pot contents was to open the upper story window and empty the pot into the street below. In Edinburgh, this practice acquired a specific call, garde-loup, a corruption of the French garde le, watch the water, shouted from the window before the contents arrived. Pedestrians had the time between the shout and the pour to move, in theory. The practice was not unique to Edinburgh. London had equivalent warnings, equivalent windows, equivalent streets, receiving the same contributions from the same height. The word gutter comes from the Old French gautai, meaning the drain. And in medieval cities, the gutter was not the narrow channel at the edge of a modern road, but the centre of the street itself, the low ground where everything converged. The street was the gutter was the street. The daily cleaning cycle, theoretically once, per Dalton Y, practically whenever the rakers got to your district, addressed what had accumulated since the last time, and then left the street to begin accumulating again. The street's relationship with accumulation was continuous. The rakers were periodic. Someone above you opens a window. You hear it before you see it. The latch, the groan of the frame, the specific sound of a window that has swollen slightly in the damp and requires force to open. A sound distinct from a window that opens easily. You have already moved. Not dramatically, a step toward the wall, a slight shift in your trajectory, a pause in your stride that redistributes your weight toward the building face, rather than the centre of the lane. This is the practiced response of a person who walks this street regularly, and has categorized the sounds of its upper stories as information relevant to your physical position. You look up briefly, a woman at the window, leaning out to look at the morning, not at you. No vessel, no imminent contribution to the lane's ongoing situation. You continue. Your shoes are still where they were on your feet, still wearing the mud from the first 100 yards of your walk, the mud that has dried slightly on the leather, and which your foot has pressed into the cracks of the upper, where it will remain for the rest of the day. You have not yet arrived at your destination, and you have already made a series of decisions about which parts of the lane to walk in and which parts to avoid, none of which involved conscious deliberation. London employs rakers, men paid from city funds to clear the streets of accumulated waste, working with carts and shovels on a district-by-district schedule. The rakers are not a bad idea. The rakers are, in principle, the city's acknowledgement that the street cannot manage its own output and requires human intervention to process the backlog. In Rome, this problem was managed by the street drainage system itself, the aqueduct overflow, the gutter channels, the sewer connections, which operated continuously and did not require a man with a cart to be in your specific district on your specific day. In London, it requires exactly that, and the rate at which one man with one cart can clear one district is not the same rate at which one district produces the material requiring clearance. The rakers operate at a permanent deficit. They clear a section, the section refills. They move to the next district. The first section has refilled before they return. The city is aware of this. The city has passed ordinances about it. The ordinances note the problem with the specificity of people who have thought carefully about a problem they cannot solve. The rakers come when they come. The lane looks like the lane looks. You reach the market end of the lane, where it opens into the wider space of the market street, and you stop for a moment at the edge of the opening. Your shoes are the shoes you put on this morning, and they have acquired a coating of the lane that will not be easily separated from them before you get home this evening. The mud is the mud, not catastrophically deep today, not one of the days where the decision to wear these shoes instead of the others constitutes an error. In judgment you'll spend the afternoon regretting, but present, adhesive, committed to the leather in the way of mud that has had 4 days to develop opinions about the streets it occupies. Your hem has also collected some of the lane, the lowest edge of the outer layer dark with it in the way of a hem that has been in contact with medieval October mud, which is not a neutral substance. You stand at the market entrance and look at where you are going and then at where you came from. The lane is the lane. The pig is in it somewhere. The upper story windows are what they are. The centre of it is what it is. You turn toward the market. The market street is wider and louder and smells differently from the lane. Not better, exactly, but differently. More competing sources. More variety. The smell of the fish stall and the bread and the animals at the far end, and the general productive smell of a lot of people and their goods in a relatively small space. You have been here most mornings. You know this smell the way you know all smells of your regular routes, as a landscape of information that maps the space before you can see all of it. The lane behind you is quieter now, the morning population of it having dispersed to wherever morning populations disperse. It is continuing to be itself without you in it. The mud at its centre is continuing to receive what it receives. The gutter, the centre, the channel, the low ground where things go, is doing what gutters do in a city where the gutter is all there is. You are warm in your wool. Your shoes have the lane on them. The day continues into the market, and you continue into the day. The market street is the loudest place in your immediate world, which is not a particularly competitive category, given that the loudest thing in your lane most mornings is the pig. But the market achieves a different quality of loud, the specific loud of human activity organized around the exchange of goods. Voices at multiple registers negotiating with each other over prices and quantities. The animals at the livestock end making their contributions. The carts on the wider paving here producing a different sound than they make in the lane, because the paving here is different. Some of it is actual stone, laid by people who understood that a market functions better on a surface that can be addressed after the animals leave than on one that absorbs everything it has ever received. The smell is the market smell, which is layered and competing. The bread stall's clean warmth, the cold animal presence from the far end, the fish smell from the direction you are heading, and underneath everything the baseline of a large number of people and their goods and their animals in a space that is not large. You move through it the way you always move through it, with the navigation of someone who has been here often enough to know which stalls are where, who is behind which counter, which side of the cloth merchant's display has the goods worth looking at today. The woman with the apples is where she always is, the candle seller. The cloth merchant whose stall extends somewhat beyond what the market ordinances technically permit, which is a conversation the market authorities and the cloth merchant have been having for some years without either party arriving at a conclusion that satisfies both of them. People press around you with the comfortable pressure of a crowd that is busy and moving, and not particularly thinking about you. Your shoulder against a shoulder, your elbow briefly in contact with a basket. The small physical negotiations of shared space. The ground underfoot is firmer here than in the lane. The traffic keeps the centre packed, and the stall holders have laid boards and stones over the worst of the mud. But it is uneven, in the way of a surface that has been addressed piecemeal by many people over many years without a unified plan. Londinium's Roman water supply was drawn from the Walbrook stream via a timber-lined channel, supplemented by smaller conduits, bringing water from higher ground north of the settlement. At its functional peak in the 2nd century, it supplied public fountains throughout the urban area. The standard Roman provision, where fountains overflowed continuously into the street drains, providing free water to anyone who came with a vessel, while also maintaining the flow that kept the drainage moving. When the Roman administration withdrew from Britain in 410 AD, the timber supply channels were not maintained. Timber joints fail. The channels developed leaks. The leaks undermined the surrounding ground. Sections of the channel collapsed. Within a generation, the fountains stopped. Water supply reverted to wells which had been there before the Romans arrived, which were still there, which drew from the same groundwater that the city's absence of waste management was simultaneously affecting from above. This is the water supply you are working with. This is what 800 years of well-only water provision looks like from inside it. The fish stall is near the river end of the market, which is the logical location. The eels and herring arrived from the Thames this morning, and this position shortens the journey. You look at what is available. The man behind the stall gestures at the eels with the practiced confidence of someone who has characterized most of his stock as particularly good today and has arrived at a professional relationship with that characterization. The eels look like eels. You look at them in the way of someone assessing something they buy regularly and have no particular way of independently verifying. The eels were in the Thames this morning, in a trap set at a point the fisherman considers reliable. The Thames this morning is the Thames, which is a river, and which has the quality of a river that has been receiving a city's contributions for 800 years without a sewer system to intercept them before they arrive at the water. The eels were in it. They were in it until this morning. You are going to eat them this evening. The Thames in 1250 receives everything London produces that cannot otherwise be managed. The tanneries along its south bank. Bermondsey has a cluster, the largest and oldest, discharge their processing waste directly into the river or its tributaries. Oak bark, urine, animal dung. The organic residue of hide processing with a biological load several times that of raw sewage. The slaughterhouses at Shambles, in Newgate, contribute via the gutters that drain toward the river. Dye works contribute. Cesspits inadequately sealed, which is most of them, the regulations governing construction being more aspirational than enforced. Leach into the groundwater that moves toward the river. The water carriers who fill their barrels for resale in the city draw from points upstream of the worst of the industrial discharge, from sections of river classified as cleaner by comparison rather than by any independent measure. The word upstream is doing significant work there. The Thames is continuous. What it receives downstream, it carries upstream in the next tide. The distance between the tannery and the water carrier's barrel is a matter of geography and the direction of the current on any given morning. The water carrier is working the market, his barrel on a cart at the edge of the stall row, the ladle hanging from the side. You pay a halfpenny for a measure, and he draws it from the tap, and the water comes out cold with the slightly mineral, slightly wooden quality of water that has been in a barrel since early morning after being drawn from the river before dawn. You drink it standing. It tastes like the water always tastes, not alarming, not different from what you expect. Your body has been calibrated to this water through years of continuous exposure, through the slow adjustments a body makes when no alternative is available. The cup is the carrier's cup, used by everyone who has bought a measure this morning, wiped between customers with the cloth he carries for the purpose. A cloth that has wiped many cups and absorbed many mornings, and is doing what it can with the resources it has, which is what most things in this city are doing. In Rome, water was not something you purchased from a man with a barrel. The aqueduct overflow went to public fountains, and the fountains were free, and the volume available was sufficient that carrying a vessel to the nearest fountain and filling it was simply part of a Roman morning. Not a commercial transaction, not a relationship requiring payment. Just the infrastructure providing what infrastructure provides. The water carrier, the person whose trade is selling water by the measure to residents who cannot easily access a source, is a feature specifically of cities without functioning public water provision. They appear in the records of medieval European cities, with the regularity of a profession meeting a consistent demand. They are not creating the gap in the system, they are filling it. You pay a halfpenny because the infrastructure that would make the halfpenny unnecessary has not existed here since before your great-grandmother was born, and someone has to bring the water from somewhere, and in the absence of the infrastructure that would do it automatically. The someone is this man with this barrel and this ladle and this price that he sets and you pay. Nobody in 1250 knows that the fish and the water share a category of danger. This is not stupidity, it is the boundary of available theory. The dominant medical framework for understanding epidemic disease is miasma theory. Bad air, specifically the bad air produced by decaying organic matter and stagnant water, is the cause of illness. The smell is the vector. Get away from the bad smell, and you reduce your risk. This is wrong about the mechanism, and not entirely wrong about the correlation. The places generating the worst smells were also the places where the conditions for disease transmission were densest, because the same conditions produce both. The advice to avoid bad-smelling areas was medically confused and practically not useless. The problem is that it cannot explain why the same water sickens one person and leaves another untouched, or why illness appears weeks after exposure, or why it moves in patterns that don't map to smell. Nobody has a microscope. Germ theory is 6 centuries away. The fish in your basket, the water in your cup, and the river they both came from are not connected by any framework currently available to you. They are simply the market. You buy 2 eels, and a small amount of what the fishmonger is calling fresh herring, with the confidence of a man long established in a professional relationship with that particular word. You pay what you pay. The eels go into your basket. You eat the herring standing near the stall, in the way that people eat at markets. Not a meal exactly, but food addressed while standing, because the market requires standing, and the food is there, and your body is making a case for it. The herring is good. It is cold and salty, and has the texture of fish that arrived in cold weather this morning. And it is genuinely good, and you eat it without reservation, because food that is good, and available, and in your hand is not a category requiring hesitation. The market continues its noise around you. Your basket has eels that were in the Thames this morning. Your cup had water from the same river. You have had a good morning at the market, which is what this morning is, and that is the correct way to understand it. You move back through the market toward the lane that brought you here. The crowd is at its fullest now, the mid-morning density before the vendors begin packing down. The noise is complete. Voices, animals, the specific sound of negotiation and transaction. A child crying somewhere in the middle of it for reasons unclear. Your shoulder finds other shoulders. Your basket requires a managed grip through the crowd. The ground underfoot shifts as you move from the better paved central section back toward the lane edge. From the boards laid by the stall, holders to the mud that the boards were laid to avoid. At the far end of the market street, where the buildings thin and the road opens toward the south, you can see the river, a flat strip of silver between the roof lines. The light on it cold and still, a barge moving slowly in the direction of the bridge. You look at it for a moment, which is the look you give something you see every day. The river is what it is. You have taken 2 things from it this morning. You turn back toward the lane and the way home. You are home. The basket is down. The eels are in the crock. Your hands smell of the market, fish and the specific hand, residue of coins that have passed through enough hands that they carry a kind of biographical information on their surfaces. And underneath that, the smell that has been there since you dressed this morning, the smell of a body that has been wearing the same wool for several days in the specific conditions that wool accumulates experience in. You are aware of it in the particular way you become aware of it when you stop moving, and the day is no longer providing distractions. It is not a remarkable smell in this city in 1250. It is simply what people smell like, the way the lane smells like the lane, the way the market smells like the market. This awareness does not produce in you the moral urgency it would produce in someone from a later century who has been conditioned to regard this state as an emergency. It produces a practical question, which is whether today is a day you are going to do something about it. The practical question has a shape that anyone in this city understands without having to work through the logic explicitly. You would need water. The water would need to be hot. Hot water requires a fire that is already burning for other purposes to be burning longer, which means more wood, which costs money. Or you draw from the fire's heat when the fire is already serving the cooking, and spend an hour hauling and heating additional water in containers that can manage the job. You would need a vessel large enough to sit in, or at minimum to use effectively on the parts that require the most attention, which is an investment not every household in this lane has made. You would need to do this somewhere. The house, if the house has room, and you have the privacy, or the bathhouse, if you are going to spend money on a bathhouse, which charges for the water and the heat both. The calculation is not, do I want to bathe? The calculation is fuel, labor, coin, and time, measured against what you gain at the end of it, measured against how long that gain lasts before the lane and the wool reassert themselves. In Rome, this calculation did not exist. The baths of Caracalla opened in 216 AD and held 1,600 bathers simultaneously. Admission was a quadrans, the smallest denomination in Roman currency, worth roughly nothing. The coin you used when you needed to give someone something technically described as payment, but did not want to actually pay them. The complex ran from approximately noon to dusk and occupied 27 acres, which included not just the bathing halls, but exercise grounds, libraries, gardens, and shops. The hypercaust, the underfloor heating system, worked by channeling hot air from furnaces through a raised floor supported on thousands of small brick pillars, the heat rising through the structure, creating a floor warm enough to require sandals and walls that radiated the accumulated temperature. The aqueduct brought the water. Slaves stoked the furnaces. The state paid for the operation as a provision to the city, the same category of provision as the roads and the grain dole, because a city that provided its population with hot baths daily was a city that had decided hot baths were a civic good rather than a private luxury. This is the version of bathing that Rome operated for 400 years and then stopped. Your tub. If the word applies to what you have, which is a wooden vessel that does the job when the job requires it, is in the corner, it is not large. It holds enough water to address the situation by sections rather than all at once, which is the standard approach when the water has been hauled in buckets from the well and heated in the pot over the fire and carried to the tub without losing too much of the heat in transit. You do the arithmetic of the fire and the pot and the hauling and decide that today is not entirely that day, or that today is partially that day. The face, the hands, the areas that have accumulated the most of what the week has provided, accomplished with the water that is already warm from the morning's cooking, rather than a full deliberate heating for the purpose. The lye soap is on the shelf, which is a cake of wood ash and rendered animal fat that has been sitting there long enough to have hardened to the point where it requires some negotiation to produce useful quantities of lather. But does, eventually, produce useful quantities of lather. It is caustic in the way that effective things often are. It addresses the situation. The bathhouse at Southwark across the bridge, on the south bank, the side of the Thames that has the tanneries, and the establishments the church disapproves of, and the stews, operates on a commercial basis that makes the Roman model legible by contrast. The stews are bathhouses named for the method: hot water, steam, the body addressed by heat. They charge for entry, they charge for water. Some of them charge for additional services that have given Southwark its particular reputation. And the relationship between commercial bathing and commercial sex in medieval European cities is complicated enough that the Bishop of Winchester, who owns the land these establishments operate on and collects rent from the women working in them, has an official designation for those women that becomes, in London slang, simply his geese. The Bishop of Winchester collects rent from brothels. This is a fact the medieval church has accommodated through a logic of containment. Better to manage and tax the thing than to drive it underground, which is a pragmatic position that does not require the church to endorse it, only to profit from it, which it does consistently. The point is that the bathhouse and the brothel share a postcode, because they share the economics. Both require water, heat, a warm interior, and a clientele willing to pay for access to something their domestic situation does not easily provide. The water in your basin has gone grey, in the way that water goes grey when it has done its work on a body that has been living in wool for several days. You look at it. This is accurate information about where the wool and the body and the week have arrived. The lye soap has done what the lye soap does, which is aggressive and effective, and leaves your skin feeling as though it has been addressed by something that takes the task seriously. You are cleaner. This is real. The lane outside is not cleaner, the wool is not cleaner, and your body will have re-established contact with both of them before the afternoon is finished. But for this specific window of time, you are in a state that you recognize as the correct state. The state that the body prefers when given the option, and you experience this briefly before covering it again with the wool and returning to the day. The fuel cost is where the Roman model and the medieval model diverge in a way that isn't primarily about knowledge or intention. A Roman bath the size of Caracalla consumed roughly 10 tons of wood per Dalton Y to keep its furnaces operational. This was viable because the Roman state was paying for it, sourcing it, employing the people who managed it. For a private medieval household attempting to produce hot water for bathing, the calculation is a full tub requires approximately 40 gallons of water, each gallon weighing 8 pounds, which means hauling 320 pounds of water from the well in the lane to the house without a system of pipes to do it automatically, then burning enough wood to bring that volume of water to a usable temperature, which is wood that is not heating the house and not cooking the food and has no purpose other than this. In a city without a functioning aqueduct, every gallon of hot water costs labor and fuel, both of which are finite. In a city with one, both were externalized into the infrastructure. This is not a fact about medieval people's preferences. It is a fact about what infrastructure does to the cost of the things it supports. When the infrastructure went, the cost came back, and bathing went from a daily civic activity to a periodic logistical undertaking. The water goes out. Your hands are clean in the way that hands are clean when they have been attended to by something that takes the task seriously, and the rest of you is at least addressed, and you have the eels in the crock and the afternoon ahead, and the fire still going at a level, useful for the evening. Outside the lane continues. The pig makes its contribution to the lane's overall acoustic and olfactory situation, which is ongoing and not addressed by anything currently available to you. You put the soap back on the shelf. You pull the wool back on. The smell of the wool has changed slightly from the smell of the wool this morning, in the direction of less. This is what clean is in 1250, which is not a lesser version of some other definition of clean. It is simply what the word means when the word is doing its work in the available conditions, which is what all words do, in every century they're used. The cesspit is at the back of the property, which is the correct location and also the only available location, and you know where it is in the dark, the way you know where everything essential is in the dark, by the particular combination of where the boards are underfoot and where the smell arrives before you do. The boards are wooden, which is what boards are, and they are in the condition that boards reach when they have been serving this purpose in this position for some years, and have been addressed by the weather and the use, and a level of maintenance that reflects the priority this particular infrastructure occupies in your list of urgent repairs. Beneath them is the pit itself, a roughly rectangular excavation, stone, lined if you live in a household that invested in stone lining, earth-sided if you do not, receiving what it receives from the household above it, and from the household's visitors, and from the accumulated biology of everyone who has used this lane since the house was built. It is not, as a category of facility, ambiguous about what it is. It achieves its purpose. Its purpose is containment, and it contains until it doesn't. At night, or in the dark of the early morning when the body has made its case regardless of preference, you cross the yard in whatever you are wearing and lift the board and sit on the beam or the seat, if there is a seat, and attend to the situation, and then replace the board and return to the house. And this sequence is the sequence that manages this particular aspect of being a body in 1250. There is no lamp that makes sense here. There is the dark and the smell and the boards and the cold, particularly in winter when the biology of the situation is at least mitigated by the temperature. And there is the reliable presence of the pit below you, which is always there, which you do not think about in any philosophical register, because a thing that is always there becomes part of the architecture of existence, rather than an object of reflection. The cat is usually somewhere in the vicinity, for reasons of its own. You replace the board. You go back inside. The pit has received what it received. The Cloaca Maxima was begun around 600 BC by Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king of Rome, to drain the marshy valley between the Capitoline and Palatine hills. The valley that would become the Roman Forum, once the drainage made it usable. The original channel was open, an engineered stream directed to the Tiber. The vaulting came later, stone arches turning the open channel into a covered sewer, the engineering shifting from drainage to active waste transport as the city grew over the channel and needed to put it underground. The vault structure used a barrel arch, the same principle that holds up Roman bridges, the arch distributing weight into the flanking walls, built from tufa and later concrete, the hydraulic concrete that sets in wet conditions. That has been sitting underwater and underground for 2,000 years in some sections, and is still structurally coherent. The channel's dimensions were generous, tall enough for a man standing, wide enough for a boat, according to Pliny, who notes that the current floods occasionally sent boats through it. The design maintained a flow rate sufficient to scour the channel walls. Waste did not accumulate, because the hydraulic calculation ensured it could not accumulate. The water moving fast enough to carry everything with it to the Tiber. You have a pit in your yard. The pit holds things rather than moving them. This distinction is the engineering difference between a sewer and a cesspit, and it is a distinction that Rome solved in 600 BC, and that 1250 London has not solved, and will not solve for another 600 years. The lane has several cesspits, which is what lanes in cities have when there is no drainage system to consolidate the function. London ordinances specify that cesspits must be maintained at certain distances from neighbouring properties, 2.5 feet from a neighbour's wall, if the pit is stone, lined, 3.5 feet, if it is not. Because an unlined pit leaches in a radius, and what it leaches moves through the ground in directions that are not governed by property boundaries. The ordinances exist. The distances they specify reflect genuine understanding of the problem. The people writing them understood that cesspits near wells were a problem, that cesspits near cellars were a problem, that cesspits that leaked were a problem in proportion to the distance between them, and the next thing they should not be near. The gap is between the ordinance and the lane, which is a consistent feature of urban regulation in every century, and which in this case means that the actual distances between cesspits and wells and neighbouring foundations in this lane reflect the geometry of the available space, rather than the geometry specified in the document. The document is aspirational. The lane is actual. The gong farmer comes at night. Gong is the word, the privy, the cesspit, the facility itself. And the farmer is the man who empties it, which is a professional classification that has existed in London as long as London has had pits that fill. The law requires night work between 9 in the evening and 5 in the morning. The contents of the city's cesspits move through the streets in carts, headed for the dung heaps outside the city walls. And this schedule is enforced because the alternative, the carts moving through daytime streets, through the market, through the lanes, was tried and was found to produce consequences that even a city already accustomed to its own smell found difficult to manage. The gong farmers are, by some records, among the better paid manual workers in medieval London, which makes sense in the way that wages for essential, hazardous, and universally avoided work tend to make sense. What they collect is sold. Night soil, the euphemism that becomes the standard term, doing the polite work that the situation requires, goes to the market gardens outside the city, to the farmers who understand that what a city's cesspits produce is what a field needs. There is nothing wasted about this. The nitrogen cycle continues whether or not the people participating in it understand nitrogen cycle. Your pit is not full. You know it is not full the way you know these things when you have been living with a pit for long enough. The smell shifts when the pit approaches capacity, and the boards sit differently when the space below them is no longer absorbing efficiently. And there is a particular silence to a pit that has room compared to one that does not. It has room. It has had room for longer than you expected, which suggests either that your household is producing less than the expected rate, or that the stone lining is leaching more than it should, which is information you are storing in the part of your awareness that addresses practical concerns when they require addressing and sets them aside when they do not yet require addressing. When it is full, you will send for the gong farmer and pay his fee, and he will come at night with his cart and his workers, and the pit will be addressed, and the cycle will resume. This is the system. The system works in the specific sense that things that need to be managed are managed eventually, which is a lower standard of working than Rome's system worked, but is the standard available. In 1326, a man named Richard the Raker fell through the boards of his own cesspit and drowned. This is in the historical record, which is where it sits in the way that historical records absorb information that was significant enough to record, and significant enough to preserve through 600 years of subsequent events, without specifically being the kind of significant that anyone was seeking to preserve. The boards failed. Richard the Raker, the name indicates his profession, which is the gong farming trade under an alternate title. The man who raked the cesspits for a living went through a surface he presumably had reason to trust into the contents of the pit below, and did not come back out. The coroner's record is matter, of fact in the way that coroner's records are matter, of fact, because the coroner's record's purpose is documentation rather than commentary. He drowned. The pit is identified. The boards are noted as rotten. The record moves on. It is possible to read the Richard the Raker entry as a comment on something larger, on what medieval London sanitation infrastructure required of the people who maintained it, on what the absence of Roman engineering produced in terms of human cost, on the particular indignity of a death that happens in the place where the system that is supposed to manage human waste is managed. But the record does not do this. It just records it. The commentary is available to anyone reading from later. The people who live in castles have a different solution, which is the garderobe, a stone shaft in the castle wall, projecting outward from the main structure with a seat at the top and a drop at the bottom that delivers the contents to the moat, the base of the wall, or a cesspit at the castle's foundation, depending on the castle's construction. The word garderobe means wardrobe, garda to keep, robe clothing. And the reason clothes were stored in the garderobe shaft was that the ammonia from the pit below kept the moths from the wool, which is an intersection of practical textile care and waste management that produces as a side effect. The word wardrobe, which you still use for a piece of furniture that has no shaft and no pit and no castle wall and no ammonia, but which retains the name of the thing it replaced, when the thing it replaced served both functions simultaneously. The language outlasted the architecture. The castle people had a stone shaft with a seat and a drop. You have boards over a pit. Both of you have, in some sense, a garderobe. Rome had the cloaca maxima, which had neither boards nor shaft nor pit, but a barrel, vaulted channel in continuous hydraulic operation, which is still draining the city today, and which was built in its original form before the first Roman emperor was born. The rumour arrives before the sickness does. This is how it works. The ships come from Bordeaux and from the ports on the continent, and the sailors talk, and the merchants talk, and the people who meet the ships talk, and by the time the thing the rumour is describing has made its way up from the southern ports toward London, the city already has a shape of the thing in its collective mind, assembled from the accounts of people who saw it or heard it from people who saw it, each account shedding some fidelity and gaining some distortion in the transmission. It is 1348. The stories have a consistent structure, swellings under the arms, in the groin, in the neck, black and swollen to the size of apples, or eggs, the specific size of the swellings being something that the accounts dwell on with the precision of witnesses, trying to communicate something that needs to be understood correctly. People are dying. The rate at which people are dying is a piece of information the city is receiving and not quite integrating, because the rate at which people are dying in the accounts exceeds the rate your experience has categorized as possible. The market is still open. The lane is still the lane. The stories come in from the south, and you hear them, and they have the quality of information that is true, but that has not yet been made true by contact with the place where you live. The rats have always been in the thatch. This is not a new piece of information, and it is not alarming information. They eat the grain stores. They run the walls at night. The cat has a professional relationship with them that produces variable results, and their presence is the presence of something that has been there long enough to be part of the category of things that are simply there. What is different this summer is that they are dying in the open. Not in the walls where things die and are dealt with eventually, but in visible locations, in the middle of the day, staggering in the specific way that animals stagger when what is happening to them has moved past the point where they are capable of the concealment that prey animals practice as a survival behavior. You see 3 in the span of a week in different places, each one completing its process in a location that makes the process visible. You do not know what this means. Nobody in 1348 knows what a rat dying in public means, which is a piece of the information problem. The fact is visible. The mechanism is invisible. And without the mechanism, the fact is just a fact, one of the many facts that a summer in the city produces, filed in the category of things that are strange, rather than things that are warnings. Yersinia pestis is a bacterium, which is a category of organism that will not have a name for 5 more centuries. It lives in the gut of the oriental rat flea, Xenopsilla chupis, which lives on the black rat, Rattus rattus, which lives in grain stores, in thatch, in the middens behind houses, in the spaces between walls, in every location where there is warmth, concealment, and something to eat. When the flea bites a rat that is sick and dying, it takes the bacterium into its gut. When the rat dies, the flea needs a new host and will accept a human in the absence of a rat. The flea bites the human. The flea's gut is blocked by the bacterial mass, and it cannot feed properly, so it regurgitates the bacterium into the bite wound. The bacterium enters the lymphatic system. The lymph nodes swell in the armpits, in the groin, in the neck, and the swelling is the body's lymphatic system doing what it does when it is trying to contain something and losing. The accounts are accurate about the swellings. The accounts have the size right. They do not have the mechanism right because the mechanism is 6 centuries from anyone's ability to observe it. But they have the physical description of the process right because that part was visible. The cesspits the rats nested around, the grain stores the rats moved through, the thatch the rat fleas overwintered in. None of these was designed to produce a plague. They produced one anyway, because they produced the conditions the rat population needed to reach the density. The flea population needed to maintain the pathogen load the transmission required. This is what infrastructure does when it manages human waste in pits, rather than flushing it through hydraulic channels to a river. It holds the waste holds the rats hold the fleas hold the thing that will kill a third of Europe. The physician's advice is to burn aromatic wood in the street. Juniper and pine, or whatever the household can provide, the smoke filling the lane with the smell of something that is not the smell of the lane. The theory being that the bad air, the miasma, that carries the sickness can be corrected by good air, specifically aromatic air that displaces the corrupted kind. You do this. Everyone in the lane does this. The fires burn for days, and the lane fills with smoke. And the smoke does something useful about the insects, and something less useful about the bacteria, which is to say it provides no meaningful protection against Yersinia pestis, but does, accidentally, reduce flea activity in its immediate vicinity, which is a partial mitigation achieved by a completely wrong theory, which is how medicine in 1348 tends to work when it works at all. The wealthy leave. This is the other piece of medical advice. Flee the city, get away from the bad air, remove yourself from the source of the miasma. This advice is correct in the specific sense that distance from the rat population was the most effective available intervention, achieved by a mechanism the advisors did not understand. The wealthy take their carts and their households south or north or west, out to their country properties, out to the places where the rat density is lower and the flea population is thinner, and some of them survive on the basis of advice that was right for the wrong reason, which is a kind of luck that the medical profession of 1348 does not recognize as luck because it appears to confirm the theory. Islamic cities in 1348 have an initial mortality differential that the chroniclers notice and that later historians spend considerable time explaining. Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad. The sickness arrives there too, and it kills there too, and by the time the wave has passed, these cities have lost fractions of their populations that are catastrophic by any measure. But the initial rate in some accounts is different, and the explanations converge on several things that Islamic urban life, provided that European urban life, did not. Ritual washing, wudu, required 5 times daily before prayer, running water over the hands, face, and forearms, which is not a germ theory intervention, but is a contact pathogen intervention, which is a category of intervention that works regardless of the theory behind it. Mosques had ablution fountains. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, written in 1025 and studied throughout the Islamic world, included recommendations about quarantining the sick and avoiding contaminated water that were not derived from germ theory, but were consistent with what germ theory would later recommend. The public baths, hammams, were funded institutions, not commercial ventures operating on the Southwark model, open to the population as a matter of religious provision rather than commercial transaction. None of this made Islamic cities immune. The plague killed hundreds of thousands in Cairo. The differential is a matter of rates and timing, not of categories. But the rates matter, and the infrastructure that produced the rates, the washing provisions, the drainage, the water access, was a different set of inherited conditions than the cesspit, and well arrangement producing the conditions in the lane. You know it has arrived in the city when the bells do not stop. The bells mark deaths. This is their function. The passing bell, rung as the soul departs, rung again for the burial, and ordinarily the bells mark individual events, specific people, specific mornings. When the bells are continuous, when you lie in the dark and the bells are ringing from multiple parishes, and they have been ringing since before you slept, and they are still ringing when you wake, the individual deaths have collapsed into a rate, and the rate is the thing the bells are now marking without being designed to mark it. The market is thinner. The stalls are fewer. The woman with the apples is not there, and you do not know why, and you do not seek to find out why, because finding out requires contact with information channels that are themselves contact points. You stay in the lane. The lane loses people, the way lanes lose people when something is moving through them, not all at once, not in any visible wave, but cumulatively. One household, and then the next, the doors that stay closed and then stay closed longer and then remain closed in the specific way of doors where no one is coming to open them. The pig in the lane continues. The pig seems uninvested in what is happening around it, which is a perspective the pig is entitled to hold, given that Yersinia pestis does not have the same interest in pigs that it has in rats and the people who live near them. What the cloaca maxima would have done, if London had had a cloaca maxima, is not what it was designed to do. It was designed to drain the forum, to take the marshy valley and make it usable, to move water and waste through the city to the river. It was not designed as a plague intervention. But what a hydraulic sewer does to rat habitat is what running water does to standing water. It removes it. Rats require cover, warmth, and food, and they will live in any environment that provides these. But they thrive in environments that also provide the undisturbed accumulating organic material that cesspits and middens generate over years of use. A city whose waste moves rather than accumulates does not eliminate rats. It reduces the density of the conditions rats need to reach plague transmission levels. This is the accidental epidemiological consequence of Roman hydraulic engineering. It produced cities that were, incidentally, less favourable to the specific rat flea population density that the transmission of Yersinia pestis required. Rome had plague. Roman cities suffered epidemics, but the infrastructure they built for other reasons created conditions that were different from the cesspit conditions, and different conditions produced different rates, and different rates aggregated across a city in 1348 are the difference between a third of the population and something else. The city that comes out the other side of 1348 and 1349 is a different city in every measurable sense. A third of London's population is gone, some estimates higher, some lower, the records being exactly as disrupted as you would expect the records to be when the people who kept the records were dying at the same rate as everyone else. The lane is quieter than it has ever been. There are houses empty not because their occupants left, but because their occupants are simply gone, and the specific silence of a house where no one is going to return is a silence the city has not previously encountered at this scale. The pig is still in the lane. The market will reconvene, eventually with a different set of people behind the counters. The cesspit is still at the back of the property. The boards are still the boards. The rats are still in the thatch. Nothing about the infrastructure has changed. The system that produced the conditions has not been interrogated for its role in what happened, because the mechanism is invisible, and the miasma theory has no way to implicate a cesspit as a rat habitat, as a flea host, as a bacterium, as a death. The city will rebuild into the same conditions that produced the event. This is what happens when you cannot see the mechanism. You rebuild exactly what you had, because what you had was not understood to be the problem. The lane at night is dark in the way that a city without street lighting is dark, which is darker than you are probably imagining if you have spent your life in a city where the infrastructure provides light as a default. The darkness is not total. There is the moon when there is a moon. There is firelight from windows. There are the torches outside the larger establishments when they have remembered to maintain them. But it is the darkness of a place where no one has made a collective decision about illumination as a civic provision, where light at night is a private arrangement that each household makes for itself. You do not walk the lane at night unless you have a specific reason and a specific destination. The lane at night belongs to the darkness and to what moves in it, which includes the animals and the people whose business requires the dark and the smell that the lane produces more completely in the cold air than in the warmth when the nose has grown accustomed to it. You know your lane in the dark the way you know everything you have navigated often enough that navigation has become a function of familiarity rather than vision. But it is dark. It has always been dark. It will be dark until someone decides that darkness is a problem the city should address, which will not happen here for several centuries. Right now, at this moment, in this century, while your lane is what your lane is, there is a city in what is now southern Spain, with approximately 500,000 people living in it, Cordoba, the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate of Al-Andalus. The city Abd al-Rahman III finished expanding in the 10th century, which is the century your lane's lane was already your lane's lane, already dark, already arranged around the well, and the cesspit, and the pig, 500,000 people. London, in the same period, has somewhere between 10 and 15,000, depending on which estimate you accept, all of which are estimates, because counting is difficult when the population is small enough that no one has organized a systematic effort to count. The numbers are not comparable, in the sense that 10 is not comparable to 500. They are in different categories entirely. The category of a town that has inherited a Roman framework and lost the capacity to maintain it, and the category of a city that has built something on top of that framework and kept building. Córdoba's streets are paved. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The streets of Córdoba in the 10th century are paved with stone, laid by people who understood that a city of 500,000 requires surfaces that can be cleaned after the day is done, that can drain when it rains, that do not become impassable in winter or produce the kind of mud that absorbs and holds everything it has ever received. The city has running water, an aqueduct system drawing from the Guadalquivir, repaired and extended from its Roman foundations, delivering water to the hammams, which number in the hundreds by the peak of the Caliphate, which are public baths. Funded and maintained as a civic and religious provision because Islamic practice requires washing, and the city has decided that providing the means of washing is the city's function. The streets have oil lamps. This is a thing that requires a moment to translate into what it means for a person walking through the city at night. There is light on the street, provided by the city. For anyone moving through it, the darkness that is simply the condition of your lane at night is not the condition of Córdoba's streets, because Córdoba has decided the darkness is a problem and has addressed it. The hammam works like this. You pay a small fee, which is genuinely small, priced to be accessible, because the hammam is not a commercial enterprise seeking maximum revenue, but an infrastructure provision seeking maximum participation. You enter. There are changing rooms. There are cold rooms, and warm rooms, and hot rooms. The sequence of temperatures familiar to anyone who has ever encountered the Roman bathing sequence, because it is the Roman bathing sequence, preserved and practiced and refined through the Islamic world's consistent maintenance of the infrastructure and the knowledge that runs it. The water arrives through pipes. The pipes connect to the city's water system. The water system connects to the aqueduct. The aqueduct connects to the river. No one has hauled this water in buckets from a well. No one has spent the fuel cost of heating 40 gallons with a domestic fire. The city has externalized these costs into the infrastructure, the same way Rome externalized them into the infrastructure, and the result is the same. A person who wants to bathe can bathe without performing an elaborate domestic calculation about fuel and labor and coin. You walk in, you pay the fee, the water is there. You leave clean. This is not a luxury. It is what a city looks like when it has decided that its population should be able to wash. The reason Córdoba can do this, and your lane cannot do this, is the same reason Rome could do this, and your lane cannot do this, which is the fiscal math of infrastructure. Infrastructure costs money to build, money to maintain, and money to staff. The money comes from tax revenue. The tax revenue comes from the population. The Umayyad Caliphate of Al-Andalus in the 10th century is governing approximately 5 million people across the Iberian Peninsula and generating the agricultural and trade revenue of a sophisticated, literate economy integrated into the broader Islamic world's commercial networks. The silk routes, the spice routes, the manuscript trade, the movement of scholars and goods between Córdoba and Cairo and Baghdad and Damascus. Abd al-Rahman III is collecting that revenue and spending a portion of it on the thing that large, wealthy, stable states spend money on, which is the infrastructure that makes being large and wealthy and stable self-reinforcing. The paved streets make trade easier. The hammams make disease less devastating. The water system makes fire less catastrophic. The libraries make the knowledge available that keeps all of the above running. London in the same century is a town of 15,000 people in a kingdom that is managing its infrastructure question, one monastery at a time. The knowledge of Roman engineering preserved in manuscripts that are in the monasteries and not being applied to the streets. The math is the math. You cannot build an aqueduct with the tax revenue of 15,000 people. You cannot maintain what you cannot build. Your lane at night is dark and cold and smells of the lane, which is a thing you know so completely that its presence barely registers anymore. The smell of the pig, the smell of the cesspit, the smell of the accumulated contributions of everyone who has walked this lane and everything they have brought with them. You know where the boards are in the dark. You know where the well is. You know where the goods section of paving ends and the mud begins, because your feet have catalogued this information across hundreds of crossings and stored it in the part of the body that manages familiar navigation. The darkness is yours. This is your lane. It is not a lesser version of something you are failing to achieve. It is what a city of 15,000 people with a collapsed infrastructure base looks like from the inside, which is the same as what any city of this size and these resources looks like from the inside. which is to say it looks exactly like this, like a lane, like the dark, like your feet knowing where the mud is before you step in it. The knowledge that built Sisai Gerdaba's aqueduct did not fall out of the world when Rome's administration withdrew from Britain in 410 AD. This is the thing the Dark Ages framing gets wrong, the thing that the name itself encodes as a premise, that the knowledge went dark, that it disappeared, that the loss was total and symmetrical across the world. It was not. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded in the 8th century, was actively translating Greek and Roman engineering texts into Arabic. Vitruvius, Euclid, Archimedes, the hydraulic engineers, the architects. Islamic scholars were not merely preserving these texts in the sense of copying and shelving them. They were reading them, extending them, correcting them, arguing with them, building on top of them. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, written in 1025, drew on Galen and Hippocrates and went further. Al-Jazari's Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, written in 1206, described water, raising machines that would not appear in European engineering for another 2 centuries. The knowledge was alive. It was being practiced in Cordoba and Cairo and Baghdad while your lane was dark. The loss was not of the knowledge. The loss was of the infrastructure and the fiscal base that made the knowledge applicable, which is a different kind of loss, and a more recoverable one, which is why eventually it was recovered, but eventually is not now. Now is your lane. Now is the dark. Now is the pig and the cesspit and the well, and Siti Ardoba, 500,000 people, lit and paved and washing, existing right now in the same century, in the same world, on the other end of a road that currently goes through 4 countries and several mountain ranges, and is not a road you are going to travel. The morning begins with the basin. The basin is on the shelf. You fill it from the pitcher, which was filled last night from the bucket, which was filled from the well, and the water in it is the temperature that water left overnight. In a house with the fire banked is, which is cold in the specific way, that water that has been sitting in an unheated room since last night is cold, not the dramatic cold of the well itself, but the settled cold of water that has equilibrated to a room that has been doing its best without much fire. You wash your face in it, your hands, the parts that the day will require to be in contact with other things and other people, and that you have decided require attention before those contacts occur. The water goes grey, brown in the way that water goes when it has addressed a face and hands that have been a face and hands overnight, and you tip it out, and this is your morning, and this is what morning means. And you have not thought about it in any comparative register, because there is no comparative register available to you. This is what washing is. This is what clean means. It means this, here, with this basin, and this cold water, and this morning light. In 921 AD, a man named Ahmad ibn Fadlan left Baghdad on a diplomatic mission. The Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtadir had received a letter from the Volga Bulgars, a people living north of the Caspian Sea, in what is now Russia, requesting a representative to advise them on Islamic law and to help fund the construction of a mosque and a defensive wall. Ibn Fadlan was the religious and legal expert in the delegation. He was not a soldier or a merchant. He was an educated man from a city with a population somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. Baghdad, the Abbasid capital, the city of the House of Wisdom, the city where the aqueducts worked and the public baths were open, and the streets were managed on a scale that reflected the wealth of an empire at the height of its organizational capacity. He traveled for 11 months, through Persia, through Central Asia, through territories that grew progressively colder and less organized as he went north. And when he arrived, he wrote it all down. The account that survives is called the Risala, the letter, and it is one of the most detailed first-hand descriptions of the Norse Rus traders that history has. It is also one of the most useful documents for understanding what happens to a person's sense of normal, when normal is taken away from them long enough to become visible, as a thing that was constructed rather than universal. The Rus traders Ibn Fadlan encountered on the Volga were Norsemen, Varangian merchants working the eastern river routes, trading furs and slaves and amber southward in exchange for silver and silk from the Islamic world. They were not, by the standards of their own culture, unclean people. They combed their hair. They maintained their beards. They had standards for personal appearance that they applied consistently, and their own accounts and the accounts of others who observed them suggest of people who regarded cleanliness as a value even if they enacted it differently from Ibn Fadlan's baseline. What Ibn Fadlan observed and recorded was this. Each morning, a servant girl brought a basin of water to the head of the household. He washed his face in it, and his hands, and he combed his hair into it, and he blew his nose into it, and he spat into it. Then the basin was passed to the next man in the household. He did the same. And the next man, and the next. The basin travelled through the entire household. Every man, every guest, each one completing the same sequence into the same water. Ibn Fadlan found this disgusting. He wrote it down with the specificity of a man who is not going to allow the reader to misunderstand the degree of his disgust. He came from a city with ablution fountains at every mosque and hammams on every street, from a culture where flowing water over the hands before prayer was a daily physical act, from a baseline where the infrastructure of cleanliness was built into the architecture of the day. The communal basin was not his baseline. His baseline was water that ran. Theirs was water that was carried and conserved and shared. The basin is doing exactly what a basin does when you are travelling through the Volga steppe in winter, with no aqueduct and no hammam and no infrastructure of any kind beyond what your party has carried with it. Water in the Volga steppe in November is a finite and laborious resource. You melt it from snow, or you carry it from a river that may be partially iced, or you accept what a host provides and you make it last. The communal basin practice is the practice of people who understand that clean water is a specific quantity, and that running it away after each individual use is not a conservation behaviour available to them in their context. They wash. Everyone washes. The washing is sequential rather than parallel, which to Ibn Fadlan reads as contamination, and to the Rus reads as efficiency. Both of them are right by the standard each of them is applying. The standard is not a universal truth about cleanliness. The standard is the infrastructure projection. What the society can provide, consistently, at scale, determines what the individual considers normal, and what is considered normal determines what deviations from normal read as. Ibn Fadlan reads the communal basin as filth. The Rus read it as a mourning. Neither of them is wrong about their own experience. One of them is coming from a city with 1 million people and the water infrastructure to support them. The other is on a river in winter with a basin. Ibn Fadlan spent almost a year in the north and came back to Baghdad and wrote it all down. And the account survived because manuscripts from Baghdad in the 10th century had a reasonable chance of survival given the institutional infrastructure, libraries, copyists, the organized preservation of texts that a wealthy, literate, bureaucratic civilization maintains as a matter of standard practice. The Risala is useful to historians for many reasons, but for this particular history it is useful because it gives us a calibrated observer, a man whose baseline was so thoroughly different from what he encountered that the differences became visible to him in a way they would not have been visible to anyone for whom they were normal. He noticed the basin because the basin was not what he came from. We notice London's lane because we are not from it, or because we are being asked to notice it, which is a different kind of distance, but produces a similar function. The standard is always someone's baseline. The baseline is always infrastructure. The infrastructure is always someone's choice about what to build and maintain and fund and keep running, or someone's failure to make that choice when the choice became necessary. You tip out your basin. The grey-brown water goes where it goes, out the door if the morning permits, or into the bucket that collects what the household produces and goes out later. The basin is on the shelf. It is clean in the sense that it is empty and has been wiped and is ready for the next morning. You are clean in the sense that you have used it and addressed the face and the hands, and the day can begin. By Ibn Fadlan's standard, by the standard of ablution at a running fountain, of a hammam with heated water supplied by a municipal aqueduct, of water that is not rationed and not shared and not carried up from a well by the bucket. You are doing something he would find remarkable, perhaps even in the same register that he found the Rus Basin remarkable, though he would be too diplomatic to write it down. By your own standard, which is the standard of this lane and this city, and this particular way of being a body in 1250, you are clean. You have done what clean means here. The morning is ready, the basin is on the shelf. And in Baghdad, if it still stands the way it stood in Ibn Fadlan's century, someone is finishing their ablutions at a fountain, and stepping wet, handed into a city that has the infrastructure to tell them, every single morning, that this is what normal feels like, the way your lane tells you, every morning, what normal feels like here. The cart comes through the lane sometime after midnight, which is when the law requires it to come through the lane, after 9 in the evening, before 5 in the morning, the nighttime window that keeps the work and its contents out of the daytime city. You hear it before you see it, or you would see it if you were awake to see it, which you may or may not be, the particular sound of cart wheels on the lane's uneven surface. The sound of the horse being managed at a walk, the low voices of the men doing the work, the sounds that the work itself makes which you know without having to be awake to identify them. The gong farmer's cart moves through the lane in the dark, and the city is asleep around it, or pretending to be asleep, or simply ignoring it with the practiced indifference of a population that has arranged for the maintenance of the thing that needs maintaining, and has decided that the arrangement's details are not something it needs to be conscious for. This is how cities work at night. The maintenance happens. The people who do the maintenance move through the dark. In the morning the pit is emptied, and the lane smells slightly differently than it did the day before, which is an improvement, and the city goes about its business as though the night's work did not occur, which is a transaction the city and its maintenance workers have agreed to without explicitly negotiating. What the gong farmer carries in his cart goes to the fields outside the city walls. This is not disposal in the sense of elimination. It is a transfer from one use to another, the contents of London's cesspits becoming the fertilizer of London's market. Gardens, the nitrogen cycle, completing itself in the space of an agricultural season, the city feeding the fields that feed the city. Mediated by men with carts who work between 9 and 5 and are paid well enough to accept the terms. The night soil trade is a genuine economy. The farmers outside the walls pay for the delivery. The gong farmers charge for the collection, and the city in between produces reliably what both parties need. There is nothing inefficient about it except the labour cost, which is the entire cost, which is the cost of a system that moves waste by muscle and cart rather than by hydraulic gradient and channel. Rome moved its waste by water. London moves its waste by men with carts between 9 and 5. The result is the same for the waste. The cost is very different for the city. Below Rome, below the streets, below the foundations of the buildings that have been built on top of and into and around each other for 2,000 years since the original structures, the cloaca maxima is still there. This is not a historical statement about a thing that existed. It is a present tense fact about infrastructure that has not stopped working. The original channel, or its successive rebuilt and extended versions, still drains water from the area of the former forum into the Tiber. Engineers and archaeologists who have entered it describe it, as they describe things that have been doing their job, without interruption, for a period of time that exceeds the lifespan of most civilizations, functional, intact in its substantial sections. The barrel vault still holding the load it was built to hold. The hydraulic concrete still behaving as hydraulic concrete after 2.5 millennia of contact with water. The mouth of the cloaca where it opens into the Tiber. A round arch, large enough to frame a person standing, is visible from the riverbank, and has been visible from the riverbank since the Republic. It was there when Caesar was alive. It was there when the Western Empire fell. It was there when Ibn Fadlan was travelling north toward the Volga. It is there now. Whatever else Rome lost, the aqueducts, the thermae, the hypercaust systems, the road maintenance, the administrative apparatus that organized all of the above, the cloaca maxima kept working through all of it, in the dark, underground, doing what it was built to do. Because what it was built to do is what water does when you give it a properly inclined channel and a hydraulic gradient to follow. It does not require maintenance in the sense of active intervention. It requires only that the channel continue to exist. The channel continues to exist. What Rome built and what replaced it can be listed, which is a useful exercise, because lists clarify what arguments sometimes obscure. Rome built 11 aqueducts supplying the city, total length approximately 500 miles, delivering roughly 300 gallons per person, per Dalton Y at the system's peak. Rome built public thermae in every major city, heated by hypercaust, fed by the aqueducts, free or nearly free to the population, maintained by the state as a civic provision. Rome built the cloaca maxima and its extensions, a vaulted sewer system that removed human waste from the city's centre by hydraulic transport rather than pit accumulation. Rome built paved roads across the empire, engineered to drain water from the surface, surfaced with materials selected for longevity and ease of repair. What replaced these in London in the centuries after 410 AD wells, drawing from groundwater that the city's waste management was simultaneously contaminating from above. Cesspits, receiving what the wells provided and returning a portion of it to the groundwater they drew from. Seasonal bathing, performed when the cost of fuel and labour could be managed, at a frequency determined by economic circumstance rather than cultural indifference. Gong farmers with carts, moving the contents of the cesspits to the fields outside the walls between 9 and 5. because the alternative to gong farmers was what happened to cities that lacked them, which was documented and not preferable. This is the list. The list is not a moral judgment. It is an accounting of what the fiscal and engineering capacity of a particular time and place could sustain, which in both cases was everything that the fiscal and engineering capacity of that time and place could sustain, and nothing more. The lane is quiet after the cart passes. The horses' sound and the cart wheels' sound move away down the lane toward the next cesspit on the route, and the lane settles back into the nighttime quiet that the lane has, which is a different quiet than the daytime quiet. Because at night the animal sounds are different. The pig settles, the distant dogs reduce. The city's nighttime sounds replace its daytime sounds with a version of itself that is emptier, but not empty. Somewhere underground in Rome, the Cloaca Maxima is moving water in the dark toward the Tiber, the same movement it has made every hour of every day since the 6th century before the Common Era, in the dark, without anyone watching, without anyone required to watch. Because that is what you build when you build something that works correctly, a thing that does not require attendance, because its operation is hydraulic rather than muscular, gravitational rather than animal, structural rather than contractual. The gong farmer's cart moves on muscle and horse and the negotiated terms of a nighttime economy. The cloaca moves on slope. Both of them are moving the same category of thing. One of them will stop if the horse stops. The other one will not stop until the channel collapses, which it has not done, which it shows no immediate intention of doing, which it may not do for another 2,000 years given the rate at which hydraulic concrete, set in wet conditions in the 6th century BC, has been failing, which is slowly and partially, and not in the sections that matter. The city breathes at night in a way it does not breathe during the day. The sounds reduce, the smells change, the weight of all those people and their animals and their commerce and their waste lifts slightly, and the city becomes something closer to a place rather than a condition. Your lane is a lane at night in a way it is not quite a lane during the day, when it is more of a circumstance. The boards over the cesspit are the boards. The pig is wherever the pig goes at night. The well is there, at the lane's end, drawing from the groundwater that has been receiving contributions from above for as long as the well has been drawing from it. You are asleep, or you are close to asleep, the thin, unrestful sleep of a body that has done a day and requires the night to address the day's accumulated costs. The gong farmer's cart is 3 lanes away by now, working through the city's nighttime maintenance with the efficiency of a route that has been walked often enough to become automatic. The same route, the same cesspits, the same destination outside the walls. The same morning when the city wakes to find the work done and the work has gone, and the nighttime economy invisible behind the daytime city that has quietly and consistently relied on it to keep doing what it does. The morning comes back the way mornings always come back, which is without asking and without particular concern for your readiness to receive it. The light arrives at the window in the specific grey-blue way of early morning, before the sun has cleared the roofline, and the lane begins its resumption. The pig contributes. The distant sounds of the market district beginning to assemble, the carts, the early stall, holders, the animals, drift over the rooftops in the way that the first sounds of a city resuming drift, thin and far and still organising themselves into the day. The well at the lane's end is the well. The boards over the cesspit are the boards. The basin is on the shelf. The wool is where you left it. Everything in the lane has spent the night being exactly what it was when you left it, and it is all still exactly that thing. And the morning is the morning you have had every morning in this lane. The morning that this lane produces. The morning that your body recognizes before you are fully awake as the morning and begins orienting itself toward accordingly. The fire needs to be lit. The pig is making a contribution to the lane's soundscape that suggests it has opinions about breakfast. The day has started in the way that days start when they are not particularly interested in how you feel about them starting. You know this morning. You have known this morning for every morning of your life in this city, in this lane, in this house with this window and this basin, and this well at the end, that your body has made exactly the trip to and back from enough times to have filed it in the part of navigation that does not require active thought. You know the quality of the water. You know the sound the boards over the cesspit make when the weight is distributed correctly versus when it is not. You know the specific cold of the basin in winter and the specific less cold of the basin in summer, and the way the wool smells when it comes off after several days, and the way it smells when it goes back on, which are not the same smell, but which are both so thoroughly familiar as to register as a single category, called morning. What you do not know is what the morning looks like from outside it. You cannot see the lane from outside the lane when you are in it. which is a perceptual condition that applies to everyone in every lane, in every city, in every century, and which is not a failure of intelligence or awareness. It is simply what being inside something means. In 1858, the River Thames smelled so comprehensively that the British Parliament, whose chambers faced the river, had to hang curtains soaked in chloride of lime over the windows to be able to continue functioning. This event, the Great Stink, as the newspapers called it, lasted through the summer and produced, in the way that events sometimes produce things that 600 years of accumulated evidence had not produced, a political commitment to do something about it. The something was Joseph Basil Gett's sewage system, 83 miles of underground brick sewer, completed between 1859 and 1875, capable of handling the waste of 3.5 million people, redirecting what had been going into the Thames into treatment works east of the city where the tides could manage the processed outflow. It was, by every account of the engineers who built it, and the city that used it, the thing that should have been built 300 years earlier, or 500, or immediately after the Romans left. It was not built then because it was not built then, which is a tautology that conceals the actual answer, which is the fiscal and political conditions that make a city build. Hydraulic infrastructure do not arrive on a schedule. They arrive when they arrive. Sometimes they arrive because a summer smells bad enough that Parliament cannot work. Sometimes they arrive because a brilliant administrator makes the case. Sometimes they are produced by catastrophe. In London's case, they were produced by a summer and a curtain and 150 years of population growth that had made the cesspit and river system reach its absolute limit. The sewers came back. It took 1448 years from 410 AD, but they came back. Your lane does not know this. The pig does not know this. The boards over the cesspit do not know this, and would not be comforted by it if they did, being boards. The well draws from the same groundwater it has always drawn from and asks no questions about the future of hydraulic engineering. The morning is just the morning, complete in itself, not a prelude to anything. It can see from where it is. You pull on the wool. You fill the basin. The fire catches on the second try. The eels from yesterday need to be addressed. This evening, in the crock, with whatever the garden has produced, and whatever bread is available, this is what the evening will be, and the evening is not yet. So it is simply a fact about the future that the present is holding lightly in the available planning capacity. You go to the well. The lane is cold, in the way of early morning, before the bodies and the cooking fires, and the animals have contributed their warmth to the collective temperature. The bucket goes down and comes back up, and the water is the water, cold and slightly mineral and slightly wooden and yours, and you carry it back to the house. And the morning has fully arrived now, in the way that mornings fully arrive when they have been given a task to organize around. The knowledge that built the Cloaca Maxima did not vanish. This is the thing worth carrying away from everything the lane has shown you. The knowledge was always there. The manuscripts that contained it. Vitruvius on aqueduct construction. Frontinus on the management of Rome's water supply. The engineering texts that described how to build a barrel vault, and how to mix hydraulic concrete, and how to calculate the gradient that keeps a channel self. Cleaning, these texts were being copied in Islamic libraries in the 9th century, translated in Toledo in the 12th century, studied in Bologna in the 13th. The knowledge travelled. It waited in the form it could travel in, which was writing, while the fiscal conditions that would make it applicable again accumulated slowly in the cities of Western Europe across the centuries. The population growing, the trade recovering, the tax base rebuilding, the margin between subsistence and surplus widening to the point where a city could afford to think about infrastructure again. This is what civilizational knowledge does when the civilization that built it loses the capacity to maintain it. It finds a container, a manuscript, a library, a tradition, a practice preserved in the hammams of Cordoba and the ablution fountains of Damascus, and it waits. The waiting is not dramatic. The knowledge does not know it is waiting, but the recovery, when it comes, is not an invention. It is a return. Basil Gett did not discover sewers. He built them. The discovery happened in Rome 2,500 years before the curtains in Parliament. The lane is beginning its day properly now. More sounds from the market. The smell of someone's fire catching several houses down. The breakfast smoke drifting through the lane with the morning air. Your fire is going. The basin water has been used and tipped out. The wool is on. The day's first tasks are assembling themselves in the order they require. The pig, the water, the fire, the eels by evening. The lane's small commerce of survival that has to be organized and attended to regardless of what else is true about the century, or the city, or the distance between this cesspit and the Cloaca Maxima. The distance is real. The distance is everything you have been looking at since this morning began. But it is also just the distance between where you are and somewhere else, between what the morning provides and what a different morning would have provided. And the morning you have is the morning you have. And it is a morning, and it has everything a morning needs to be a morning: light and fire and water, and the specific sound of the pig communicating its agenda. And the lane is the lane, and it is yours, and you are in it fully. The way you are always fully in the morning that is actually happening. Let the lane go quiet now. The fire is going. The water is in the pot. Somewhere down the street, the market is assembling into its daily noise. But it is far enough away that it arrives as texture rather than detail. The collective hum of a city doing what a city does. Indifferent and ongoing and not requiring your active participation right now. The well is there. The cloaca is there, underground in Rome, moving water in the dark, as it has always moved water in the dark, patient and hydraulic, and unconcerned with the centuries piling up above it. Bazalgette is coming eventually, with his brick and his 83 miles, but not yet, and not yet is fine, and the morning does not require its future to be complete. Let the boards over the cesspit settle. Let the lane sounds come down to the slow ambient sounds of early morning. The fire, the distant animal, the light moving through the window in the way that light moves when it is not in a hurry. The wool is warm, the basin is empty. You have done what the morning required, and the day is in front of you, and the night is a long way away, and there is time, right now, for the body to put down some of what it has been carrying. The lane will be here when you return to it. The pig will still have opinions. The well will still be the well. Let the morning do what mornings do when you stop requiring them to be anything other than what they are. Let it arrive without you. It knows the way.